Good evening, students, and welcome to tonight's webinar. This is on Module 1, Apply Project Scope Management Techniques. My name is Tracy Hickey, and I'm the Project Management Trainer. I know many of you have messaged me different times, so I'm the one hosting tonight's webinar, and I'll be able to answer all sorts of questions for you at the end, should you still have questions after we go through some of this. So what I want to do before we get into some things is just go through a little bit of the housekeeping. If you're not familiar with webinars, you'll see on your navigation bar there that there's a little icon where you can raise your hand. So I will just ask you every now and then to just indicate if your things are okay, that you can still hear me and that kind of thing. You can also type questions into the question box as we go through. So if you've got questions, feel free to type in anything you'd like to know, and I will aim to answer them as we go through. Otherwise, I will definitely open it up at the end, and we can have some time at the end for questions as well. So just before we move into the webinar tonight, can you just indicate whether you can definitely hear me and see the screen okay? Maybe just raise your hand if you can definitely hear okay, see okay, if everything is good. Yes, we've got hands up. Good. That's awesome. All right, and one more thing before we move on in case I forget at the end. Under the handouts tab, I have put a PDF copy of tonight's webinar, so the slides that you'll see, feel free to download that so you've got a permanent record of what we've covered. When I walk through the assessments, that will be going through that part live, so they won't be on the slides, but the slides will give you all of the other hints and tips and things like that about study in general. So feel free to download that, and hopefully that helps you as we move forward. All right, so let's get into tonight's webinar. What we're going to look at tonight is we're going to talk a little bit about project management as a whole, and then we'll break that down into the key concepts in scope, which is the foundation of everything else, all the other parts of the project. And we'll have a look at the case study documents, go through some general tips for completing assessments, and then we'll go through the 2 specific assessments within this particular module. And then, as I said, we can have some question time at the end, but hopefully most of your questions should be answered by then. So let's look at your support options as well before we get into the actual content. One of the things I just want to point out is, as you are starting your study journey, and particularly online, sometimes it can feel like you are on your own because you're doing it at home, you're studying alone, and it can feel sometimes like you don't know who to turn to and where you can get help. Personally, I have done most of my study online. I'm a big believer in distance education. It's been amazing for me to study around work. I'm currently just about to finish my MBA all by distance, so I think it's wonderful for fitting in around your general lifestyle and work and family and things like that. But I know at times it can feel a little bit difficult. So I've put on the screen here some of your support that you can go to. Your student support team, that's the phone numbers and times that they're available. They're great for any administration help if you're having trouble uploading documents, or if you need any details about your enrolment from an administrative point of view. Feel free to contact student support. They're available, as you can see, a lot during the week. The learning support team are also an amazing resource. They run daily webinars on open space. So we won't be going into how to download assessments, where to find the learning materials and that kind of thing within open space. Tonight we'll be purely looking at the content in the unit, but you can join one of their webinars that they hold each day, and they'll walk through how to get around open space and maximize that. So feel free to join one of those webinars at a time that suits. They also can do one-on-one appointments and work on study plans and any of those other study tips and help that you might need at any time. So you can book an appointment at the link that's there. The other option is to look at working with each other. Study buddies are great. You'll find students under the contacts in your message center who are at a similar point in the course as yourself. So you're able to bounce off each other and use each other for motivation and encouragement. So that's another option. Then you have your open space academic team, open colleges here. So we have 3 assessors that will be grading and marking your work as you submit your assessments. Lindsay Mitchell, Edgar Yu, and Jim Johnson. So at different times with different modules, you'll see feedback and gradings coming from one of those 3 assessors. So yeah, you'll see their names pop up. I'm here full-time at Open Colleges, so I'm available to help you with anything you've got questions about with the assessments or study materials or anything like that. So feel free to keep in touch and message me through the message centre. I also run the webinars and things like that, so you'll see me around the place as well. So feel free to reach out to any of the team depending on what your questions are, and we will help you make your online study journey as easy as possible. So that's a little bit of the support. All right, let's have a look at project management. Any questions before we get into that, or are we all good? Just raise your hand if we're happy to move on. I think we're all good with that. Yep, okay. So project management overall, it's sometimes we find students are joining the course, studying project management because they're already in the field and they just need to get their qualifications or fill some gaps. Sometimes students are completely new to this area and it's something they want to move into. So I want to look at what project management is just briefly as an overall discipline, and it's definitely a set of skills that are well sought after by employers across a whole range of various industries. It's easy to think of project management particularly just within the infrastructure, construction, mining, those type of industries, because that's where you see a lot of projects being taken place, but they are across a range of other industries as well. There's a lot of IT projects that are out there installing IT software and developing software and things like that. Personally, my background is a lot to do with event management, sales, marketing type business aspects and roles that I've had a lot of project management experience in. So that's been a completely different field where project management has been just as beneficial and practical. So the skills that you'll learn through the course, you'll be able to apply in a number of different industries depending on where your careers take you in the future. And our projects are often used within an organisation to help them achieve their strategic goals. So there might be new opportunities, requests from customers for new services or products. There might be changes that necessitate a project coming in place because of technological changes or changes in the legal or environment areas. So you'll find that organisations will use projects sometimes on a small scale and sometimes on a very large scale. So there's a range of different things that they're used for, and project management is just applying the knowledge and the skills and the tools and techniques that you learn to help meet those project requirements and make sure that basically we're delivering what the stakeholders are wanting out of that project. The key thing with a project is that it's a unique endeavour. It has a defined beginning, a defined end, and there's a set of resources that are finite. So you've got allocated human resource, materials, finance, set budget, set timeframes, things like that. So there's a definite beginning and a definite end. So projects aren't routine, repetitive, daily work. And sometimes that gets a little bit confused. So just a couple of examples. If you're taking meeting notes or any administration work within an office, that's just daily administration work. However, writing a book would be a project. We dropped to the last one there. If you're the routine manufacturer of, say, an Apple iPod, would just be an operational day-to-day task. So that wouldn't be considered a project, but if you were to design a new media player for launch, then that would be a project. So it's important to understand what a project is. It's got a set start and a set end, and that is the project life cycle. This is a diagram that you'll find inside your textbook, so you can refer to this in there as well, but it just goes through the project life cycle where it shows that we have a starting point and an end point. Same point as the initiation. You'll see that initiation stage can sometimes be called the concept stage, but it's where the project is initially defined and the high-level budgets and timeframes in organisation are kind of established, and the project is officially authorised to commence. Once it's been authorised and you've got that approval, the project always moves into a planning stage, and that can be quite extensive depending on the size of the project. But the planning stage, you'll see that will sometimes be called the development stage or the approval stage as well. That's where the more detailed budget, more detailed schedules are done, resources are planned and allocated, a lot of the risk analysis is done. We plan our procurement, our communication, define what our quality standards are going to be, etc. So we go through the whole project and plan everything out, and that's what the course you'll be doing. You'll be working on the same project, and so each of the units you'll be going through this planning stage and then the rest of the project as well. So yeah, we plan out the project, then the work of the project begins, and that's the execution stage. It may be called the delivery stage or the implementation phase of the project, but it's really when the work gets done. So in this time we are working on our milestones. We've got change control happening in there where changes are being made. We're working on team and stakeholder management, dealing with questions or negotiations or development, handling any conflicts that are coming up, etc. So all the work is taking place. We're making our changes. And during that stage, everything is being monitored and controlled. You'll see that dotted line in the diagram. So we're making sure that as the project progresses, that we are on track with our schedule and budget, our quality levels are being maintained. So if we're starting to get off track, then we are needing to use the change control process and make formal changes and monitor and control that. Doing our progress reports, all those sort of things take place during that stage. And then finally we come to our closing stage, and this is where the project comes to an end. We've finished what we're doing, we hand over our product or our service, whatever it is that we've been working on. We do all of our closure, final reporting, look back at our lessons learned, etc. So every project follows that path, regardless of the size of it. It always starts, always ends, and there's always a lot of work that happens, planning or work that happens in the middle. The reason I add this in here in the webinar is as you move through the course and you're completing your assessments, one of the things that will really help you is if you keep in mind what part of the project, what stage of the project life cycle am I in when I'm completing this documentation. So if you're completing some planning documents, make sure that you complete them as if you are in that planning phase. So I've had students that have included changes that have happened later in the project in their planning documents. But as I say to them, when you're completing that document at the planning stage, you don't know what's ahead at that point. So make sure you keep in mind where you are at the project. If you're completing a lessons learned, for example, you know that you are at the end of the project looking back on how everything is tracked, looking at how things could have been improved and done differently. So yeah, keep it in mind, and as you work through your assessments, you'll start to recognize, all right, I'm at the planning stage, or I'm at the execution stage of the project, or I'm at the closing of the project, etc. And that will just help you with your, have the right perspective on your approach to the assessments. So that's projects from an overall perspective. So when we look at managing scope, which is what this first module is all about, scope involves, well, it doesn't commence until we've gained authorization for the project. At that initial authorization stage, the project manager has the authority to go ahead and start planning. So that's really when the work of scope kicks in to place. And the first thing that we need to do within scope management is gather the requirements and find out what does this project necessitate. What are we needing to deliver? What are the deliverables? What are the expectations? So gathering all of those requirements is really important. If we fail to gather requirements correctly at the beginning and fail to define that, it can throw the entire project off. For example, if I were to say to you, I'd like you to build me a house. Could you tell me how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost? the first thing that you would need to do would be to find out from me, well, what kind of house do I want? What size? What do I want included? Is it going to be 3 bedrooms, 5 bedrooms, 1 story, 2 story? Are we including landscaping? Are we including a pool? Do we want to install quality fittings and air conditioning, or is it bare basics? And are we putting in a driveway? Until you know what the requirements are, we can't actually then do a budget. So gathering the requirements is the very first thing that we do. From that, we then define that and document that in either the scope management plan, or you might have a scope statement or a scope of works, depending on your industry. So you'll document all of that and define that really clearly. Once that's done, you can develop your work breakdown structure, which is the breakdown of the work in the project. And then from that, you are then able to do your estimates for how long each one of those work packages are going to take, what budget, what resources you're going to need, if you're going to need to procure any supplies or external things for that. So everything stems from scope, and it's the reason why this is the very first module that we study, because if we get it wrong at the beginning and we don't define it correctly, later on in the project we realize, oh, we've missed this. It's going to then cause your budget to blow out, your schedule to blow out. It's going to put pressure on your team. It just causes all sorts of issues. So getting this right at the very beginning is really important. And then when we get into the project, monitoring and controlling that scope to make sure that we don't get into scope creep is really important. So if a change is needed, and it always will be, there's always going to be changes in a project. Nothing ever goes perfectly to plan. We just need to make sure we put it through the formal change process, complete change orders or change requests, once again interchangeable terminology depending on industries. We formally make a change, say this is what we want to happen, this is the impact it's going to have, and then we seek authorization from the project sponsor, and then from there we can then formally make those changes to the budget and the schedule and that kind of thing. If we don't use the formal change process and we just add things on and add extra work on, what usually happens is we end up finding we're trying to do a lot more in the project with no extra time and no extra budget, which puts enormous pressure on your project team, and you'll find that then issues will start to get in place. You'll get frustrations and people will feel stressed, and it can escalate and cause issues. So monitoring that scope and making sure you're on track as much as possible is really important. And then you'll get to the end of the project, hand over those deliverables, and you'll always sit down at the end, should always sit down. I know this doesn't always happen in projects, but it is important to sit down at the end of it and say, all right, what did we learn from this? What worked well and how do we keep that going? What didn't work well and how could we improve that for the next project? And then that becomes great historical data that you can draw from for future projects and learn from them. So that's scope management. The way it fits into the overall project, and you'll see here, it's called the triple constraints. You'll also see it sometimes referred to as the iron triangle. But scope, which is all the features and the functionality and what's included in the project, the deliverables themselves. You've got scope. You're always going to be in a tussle, I suppose, with the schedule, with the deadlines, and also with the resources, so your people and your budget. Because if you increase scope, it's going to increase the schedule. Most likely it's going to increase the budget as well. If you have a restraint on your budget, you may have to adjust scope or reduce the schedule or whatever. So any change in any of those three is usually going to impact on the others, and it's important to know where is the priorities. Is the priority to deliver on time? For example, an event. If you're doing an event, you don't have the option to delay that deadline. You have to put on that concert or that dinner or whatever it is, that conference at that time when it's scheduled. So you have to make your changes in scope or resources. If you're developing a new, R&D drug that's going to, treat a new disease or something, there's rigorous testings and they have to meet certain regulatory standards and quality standards and things like that. So scope becomes really critical. If you're working on brakes on a car or something like that, they can't be near enough as good enough. It's got to meet certain standards and regulations. So in those sort of products, scope is really critical, and it may cost more money or the launch may need to be delayed accordingly. So when you know where the priority is and where you can flex and where you can't, it helps with decision making. And quality is in the middle, because the whole time while you are working in those other three, you want to maintain the quality expectations for the project. And sometimes that's hard if you're starting to get tight on budget and deadline. It's always hard to maintain the same quality standards. So you find that there's this constant juggling and decisions that have to be made according to it. So knowing your project, what the expectations are, where the priorities are, will really help as you're working through and getting to those tough times of having to make snap decisions and make changes to a project, and where can I adjust and where can I not. So they are all little concepts, and you'll find these are all in your textbook and things like that as well. But this really does become the foundation of project management. So that's all I wanted to touch on that, because I do want to get into the case study and the assessments, because that's mostly why you're probably on the webinar this evening. So the case study for this particular module, before I go on, are we all good? Everyone's okay with that so far? Is it everything making sense? Just raise your hand if you've got it all good. No questions? All right. We'll keep going. So the case study, in this particular one, it's a computer equipment upgrade for Thomas and Brian Brown Proprietary Limited. And it's a project that you'll use throughout the course, except for, I think, perhaps the sustainability module, but pretty much the rest of it all builds from this scope assessment. So it's important from the very beginning to really understand the organisation and the project, because the better you understand it and can visualise yourself working within that organisation, you're part of the project team and you're about to upgrade and you get a feel for what the company is all about and who the people are you're working with, it will just help you answer the assessments in a more realistic way. So the benefits of using a case study is that all the background information is provided in the additional resources folder for you. So that's in open space in the little circle that's got like a book folder type of a image on it above module 1. So all the background information that you need as you go through the modules is in that folder. And as you go through the assessments, you'll be provided with different scenarios and briefing notes that you can use. So when a change needs to be made, you'll be given the issue that's arisen, and then you can apply what you've learned to that scenario. So everything's provided for you in that respect, and it gives you a chance to learn about a new project that maybe you haven't been familiar with or been part of before. When you're completing assessments, also take time to make sure you've been through the learning content online and understand the concepts before you launch into the assessment tasks. So there's videos and you've got your textbook and that kind of thing. So understand all the different aspects of managing scope before you do the assessments, and it will just make them so much easier. You'll see throughout the learning material that there's learning activities which allow you to practice what you're learning. They're not assessed, but what you can do is upload your work and other students can, you can refer to your work and you can see what other students have done. So it gives a chance for students to learn from each other and see how other people have approached it, because sometimes there's more than one way to handle things and present information. So it's a good way to kind of see how other people approach things, but they're not assessed. So they're really just to allow you to practice what you're learning. One thing I will point out is the topic number references. You'll find in a lot of the assessments it will say refer to topic 1.2.4 or refer to topic 3.4 or something like that. What I will say about that is you will never be referred to a module outside of the module that you are studying in to help you answer your questions. So everything that you need for Module 1 assessments will be within the Module 1 learning material. Sometimes, because it assumes that you're already in the module number is missing from those topic references. What I mean by that is, if you're in scope, which is module 1, it may just say refer to topic 2.4. It assumes that you're in module 1, so you would then refer to topic 1.2.4. So if it doesn't look like it's got the module number in front, just add that in front, and that will help you find the relevant things. We are in the process of fixing that so that they all have the module number in front, but I just want to flag it just so you're aware. So if something doesn't look quite right, you'll go, I bet that's because I'm in the module already. So yeah, just wanted to flag that for you. Okay, with the quiz is always the first assessment in every module. There's a multiple choice quiz. It self-marks, and you must score 80% or higher to pass that quiz. If you're not successful the first time and you get 70% or something like that, it's fine because it's competency-based training, so you can have as many attempts at an assessment as you need to, but you just will need to wait for 24 hours before it will unlock for you to have your second attempt. And if you pass it then all is well. If not, wait another 24 hours and you can have another attempt, etc. So you'll just need to keep going until you show that you have satisfactorily completed the quizzes. Likewise, the grades in your results page can take up to 24 hours to update, particularly if it's a resubmission. So if you've resubmitted, if you've redone a quiz, or if you have resubmitted one of the written assessments and it's been graded, it may not show on your results page for 24 hours. So if it looks a bit weird, just wait that 24 hours and it should update correctly. If it gets past that time frame and there's something that just doesn't look right, that's when you would call student support and they can have a look into it and make sure that everything is as it should be. So yeah, just a couple of things that come up. So the quiz, as I said, is the first assessment. Then there are 2 written assessments per module. I sometimes get asked if I can have a look at draft assessments, and I always say we don't accept drafts as such because of the fact that you have unlimited attempts. So if you're not sure if you're on the right track, do as much as you can and give it your best go, and then submit it. Because that way you will actually receive formal feedback from the assessor, and you might have been completely on the right track and you're good to go anyway, but if not, and there's some parts that need adjustment or whatever, you'll get that feedback from the assessor to say you need to work on this section or that section. You can then make those changes and you can resubmit a second time, and if it's still not quite right, it'll come back to you again with more feedback and you can have a third attempt. It doesn't matter how many times you go back and forth. So rather than submitting a draft, just go ahead and submit the best, your best work and wait for the formal feedback, and it's much easier that way. When you are completing the assessments, use the assessment task document that you download and keep as much as possible on the one document, and use the templates where they're provided. This is important because it is easier for you to make sure that you have completed everything that you need to. The templates make sure that you have addressed all of the requirements, so it's much easier to use the templates, and it also makes it much easier for the assessors when they're going through to see that you have answered everything. The less documents that are uploaded to, the less chance there are of any technical issues on uploading, etc. So overall it's just easier to use the one document. Sometimes you will have more than one file. Audio recordings will obviously be a different file, and when you do Gantt chart, if that you're using Smartsheet or MS Project or an Excel or something like that, that's obviously going to be a different document. So it's fine, you can upload more than one, but where possible try and keep it all together. It's just that little bit easier. The word count you'll find on there, just use that as a guide. Don't worry too much, particularly in the early assessments. It's probably most applicable when you have to write paragraphs. So if you've got an answer that asks you to explain something or give suggestions for improvements and you're going to be writing out some paragraph answers, that's where the word count probably applies the most. With the templates, don't worry too much. Just fill in the templates with all the information, and in most cases you should be right? So, but just use it as a guide. It gives you an idea of the amount of information that should be needed. If you're too far under, you probably aren't including enough detail, but if you go too far over, you're probably going into too much detail. So use it as a guide, but don't stress out too much about it. And then finally, with the written assessments, before you submit, just make sure your student name and number are on the first page. Double check to make sure that you have completed all parts, because not all parts have a template. So it's sometimes easy to miss the parts of the assessment that need you to just write a paragraph, for example. So just make sure all parts have been completed and proofread it. The assignments are very practical. So think of it as you're at work, you're completing these documents for your boss. So make sure you've presented them in a professional way and proofread. Don't have a lot of spelling and grammar mistakes all through it. Just make sure it looks good. And think of the assessments as very practical, work-based documents that you would be completing. The final part of assessments are the audio recordings. So these are an important part of the assessment criteria, and being able to communicate is a key skill in project management. There's no point being brilliant at paperwork and offending everybody that you work with because you can't get on with people, or you can't get people, you know, to work with you, or get their buy-in or negotiate and that kind of thing. So that's the purpose of the audio recordings. They don't need to be in a real life situation, particularly because you're using a case study. You can just role play this with a friend or family member. It can be a work colleague, but just try to make it quite a natural conversation like you would at work if you were just having a meeting and you were just having a discussion about something. You can provide your role play partner with the briefing notes before the recording, give them some of the key points and things that they need to say, but particularly your part of the recording, rather than reading word for word from a script. If you've just got key bullet points, just try to then have a normal conversation. Doesn't matter if you stumble over some things, it's better, it shows greater communication skills than just reading a script. So yeah, just try and make it, keep it casual and don't stress too much about it, and it will flow. You'll find it will flow quite naturally. There's also a required length for the recordings. A lot of the recordings are only 5 minutes, so they're not actually very long. So they don't, you don't need to get into a lot of discussion in them. As long as you cover all the key points, you'll find that time frame will go quite quickly. The best way to record is you can just record using the camera on your phone. If you've got a smartphone, you can use the video and put it face down so that you're only capturing the audio, or you might have a dictaphone or a voice memo app or something like that that you can use, and then you simply upload the file along with your Word documents into OpenSpace for submitting. So the main thing is not to stress too much about them. Think of it as a normal conversation and a way that you're showing that you're able to communicate in a work environment. Okay, so let's have a look at the specific assessments now within this first module. All the written assessments, and you'll see as we go through them, are very practical, so you don't need to worry about formal academic writing and in-text referencing. You can, at the end of the document, put any references that you've referred to if you've used the textbook or referred to any external websites or things like that, so you can reference at the end anywhere that you have looked at for your assessments, but you don't need to do formal academic writing and in-text referencing, etc. Your role in the project is to assist the project manager as part of the project team. So when you're completing your assessments, think about where in the project you're at as far as the project lifecycle, and see yourself as an assistant to the project manager, like a project administrator or another support role within the project team, and that will help you to understand where you're coming from as you approach each assessment and what perspective you should be completing them from. Both of the written assessments have 2 parts. The first one there, the 3221802, is completed during the initiation and planning phase of the project. The 03 assessment is completed during the implementation and closing phase of the project. And the 03 one has an audio discussion as part of that particular assessment. So what I'd like to do now is just go through the documents. So are there any questions at this point? Does anyone have any questions you want to ask before we go through the documents? Or if we're good to move on, maybe just raise your hand so I know we're good to move on to the next stage. Okay, awesome. So let me just bring up first I'll just bring up the case study document. So this is the document that you'll find in the additional resources folder, and it's the background of the computer equipment upgrade project. And it's for Thomas and Brian Brown Proprietary Limited, as I said, for the computer equipment upgrade. So what I would do is I would get very familiar with this document and even highlight or whatever the key aspects that you'll be needing as you go through. So the beginning part just gives you a little bit of background. It's an organisation that's been in business for 17 years, and they provide warehousing services to a wide range of clients. Most of the workers have been employed since the organisation started. So if you've ever worked in an organisation where you've got a lot of people that have been there for a long time, they get very familiar with how things have always been done. So, you know, think of that environment where they're quite used to the way it was. And it says the culture of the company is very resistant to change as a result of that. Because of that culture, the company has not updated software for a long time, nor have they updated their computer equipment. So each department are using their own systems, their own software on very old computers. Now we're at a point where the company is wanting to purchase some new equipment, but the new software programs are not compatible with the old computers, so therefore they now have to upgrade the computers in the office. So that's a little bit of the background. You'll see here it's got Thomas Brown has decided to update the technology used. He will sponsor the project, so he's going to be the project sponsor. So you can highlight Thomas Brown as the sponsor. Basically it's just the computers are being updated, but later on the software will be updated as well. But we've got to get the computers updated first before the software can be implemented later. So for the purchasing of the new equipment, there's a budget of $400,000. So that's another key point that you can highlight. Says about the different departments and who's managing those teams, etc. Then it says Thomas has asked one of the business's project managers, Caitlin Murray, to manage the project. So you can highlight Caitlin Murray is the project manager. So she's going to be the one that you are going to be reporting to in your role. And then we have some of the really key information. Project starts 2 weeks from today, and it needs to be completed in 7 months. So that gives you your time frames to start working towards. Then we come down to this next section on the project tasks, and we've got 6 tasks here. These are all the aspects of the project that you're going to need to deliver on. So when you come to working out your work breakdown structure, this is a really good place to start, because immediately you've got 6 areas, 6 major parts of the project that you're going to be delivering on. So they can become your initial top level of your top level is the computer upgrade. Next level down will be these 6 areas, and then within those you can then break those down, to what is the work within a technology audit, what needs to take place, how do we identify the equipment required for each department, so what are some of the different steps within that, and you can start to break down the work under each of those. So this becomes the foundation of your work breakdown structure. Then we come on to the feasibility study, and this first sentence is really important. Employee surveys indicate that a high percentage of employees will not be happy with the changes and may demonstrate resistance. So you know that that's a potential future issue, something that you're potentially going to be needing to overcome. So that's something I would highlight there. Then we move into the procedures section, and we've got this whole section on the change management procedure and the steps that we'll take if a change is needed in the project. So we would generate the change request, log the status, evaluate it, authorize it, and then implement it. So it gives you the process here within the change management and then it breaks it down with a lot more detail in that part. So this gives you a lot of the information that you need for this very first assessment is all within this document, and then all you're doing is completing that first document based on the information that you've been provided. So let's have a look at that, the O2 written assessment. Download this document, put your student name and number on the first page. Then you'll come through, you'll find with the documents, it will first give you an overview of the 3 assessments, the quiz, the second written assessment and the third written assessment. So you've got 2 written assessments and a quiz, so you can skip past all of that. And you'll come down to where it's got part 2. So this is assessment 2. This is where you'll want to look at, and it basically says there's 2 parts. Part A is completing a scope management plan, and part B is preparing an email that you can send to the project sponsor. So they're the 2 parts to this assessment. When you come on down a bit further, it will then elaborate on those 2 and give you what the specific requirements are. So we come on down here, part A, scope management plan. It will say complete a scope management plan, include a description of the objectives and outcomes, deliverables, performance measures, obstacles, work breakdown structure, and change processes. And it will even let you know whereabouts within that case study document you can refer back to that information. And then it says use Appendix 1 to prepare your plan. Review topics 2.1 to 2.4. So as I mentioned before, that will be topics 1.2.1 to 1.2.4 because we are in Module 1. So we come on down then to Appendix 1, which is here, and this is where you can just complete it in here. So you'll put the project name, the project manager, and the start date. So you can, whenever you start to complete it, your documents, remember it said 2 weeks from today, so you can put a start date in to reflect that sort of time frame. Give a bit of information here about the background of why the project's taking place. What is the objective? So why is this project taking place? So it could be just like a 1 or 2 sentences in there to summarize that we are updating the computer by, for all staff and why we're doing that. So just a sentence or 2 in there about what we're doing. What are the deliverables? What are we actually wanting to deliver? So it'll be things like, we want to get computers for all staff, systems to run on the computers, we want to train the staff, etc. So some of the key things that you're going to be delivering. Work breakdown structure, that was that project tasks that I just mentioned before. So you'll start off with those 6 as your top level and then break it down a little bit further. There's some really good examples of work breakdown structures in your textbook. And so if you're not familiar with how to break it down, have a look at those examples and you'll see there's a really good one in there about a building of a house scenario. So it'll really help you to get a picture of what that means. But as I said, those project tasks will be your starting point for this. Then you have your change process. So what is that process if a change is needed? What are the steps? And then what are some of the obstacles? We know the staff are going to be resistant to change, for example. So that's going to be a potential obstacle as you move through the project. So you'll complete all this information with, as I said, present it well, as if you were presenting this to your boss at work. Put your name in here and the date, and that's part A done. So it's fairly straightforward, and as I said, most of the information is already given to you. You just got to apply it and explain it in the relevant sections. Then we come up to the second part, part B, which is the approval email. Email should be about 200 words. So this is somewhere where, you'd pay a little bit more attention to this because you don't have a template and you're writing an email. So write a cover email where you are sending the scope management plan to Thomas Brown, requesting approval for your project. So, send it through to him, to Thomas, here's the attached plan. If you're going to have a look at it, get back to me, maybe give them a deadline of when you'd like a response by or something like that, and sign it off. So just a fairly standard email that you would write to the project sponsor, about 200 words, be good. Once you've completed that email and completed this template, that's the first assessment done. You can submit it and you're done. So as you can see, they are very practical, and the key is to not overthink the assessments. They are, as I said, very practical. If we then have a look at the last assessment, same thing, student name and number on the top page, come on down past all the beginning part to where you come to part 3. Once again, it will say part A will be there's a scope amendment, so complete the change order form, and then part B will be a telephone consultation with the project manager to discuss the issues. So you've got a change order form and a audio recording. They're the 2 parts of this assessment. Once again, this will give you a bit of information about the scope amendment. So put yourself in the picture. The more you can visualize yourself there, the better. So you have now received an email from Caitlin Murray, who's the project manager, regarding a change. Caitlin, project manager, and Thomas Brown, the sponsor, have been discussing the project. They decide that they are going to lease the computers through ACC Information Technology. So they've consulted, you've got a budget here of how much it's going to cost, when they're going to arrive, and they don't know anything about the computers at this stage. So this is the change that you're going to be making, that we're now going to be leasing them through this supplier. So complete Appendix 1. So you'll come down to Appendix 1. Once again, put in the project name, the date, project number, name, and then in here, what is the change? That we're now going to be leasing the computers from ACC, and why. So give a little bit of background information that you can take from that explanation above. Then you're going to say, if this change happens, with this change, what impact is that going to have on the service and the quality? What's it going to have on the schedule? What impact is it going to have on cost? So it'll either have a positive or negative effect, and that impact will either be a high impact, a medium impact, or a low level of impact. So you can just put a little cross under whichever box. So for example, we know that they're going to cost $105,000. It's said in the information above. So that's going to be a positive impact on the cost, because it's well within budget, and might have a medium impact, and you can just make a comment that the cost of the computers is within budget. So you're just going to note that. Who are you going to need to communicate to, and then sign off, and that's your change order form. Then finally, the last part is the recording. It then says you've implemented it, the computers have now arrived. So once again, you're much later on in the project. Employees are complaining about them, they're not working, they're not happy. So now you're going to phone Caitlin Murray, and you're going to say to her, this is what the issues are and how we could have done it better. Just before I go through that, I'll just answer this question from Cara. Do we submit our change order form on the table provided in the appendix, or should we make our own? I would use the appendix. Anytime that you have a template provided, it's much easier to just use the template, because it'll make sure that the right information is there. If you have your own template and it basically covers the same information, then by all means you can use it and just include it if you can on here, or upload it separately. As long as it covers particularly this section here, it must show the impact, because that's what the assessors are going to look for, that you've identified the change and the impact. So if you have your own, you can use your own, but it is easier if you use the templates provided. If not, just make sure that you've covered the requirements. So that's the main thing with that. Yeah, so just coming back up here with the reporting, they've had problems. It will come down here, it will say here, during your conversation, explain the issues and provide your suggestions for how things could have been done better. You've also got briefing notes. So when you come on down to here, you've got a briefing note. So this is what you can give your role play partner. So because you are phoning the project manager, they will need to play the role of the project manager. So you know, if it's your partner, they will play the role of Caitlin Murray. This then tells them a little bit about who they are and what they need to do. So they just need to confirm that they've understood what you are bringing to them as far as the issues. And then you're going to discuss with them the problems that have come up and how things could have been done better. And they just need to, thank you and acknowledge your comments and things like this. So you can give your role play partner this information, and it'll be based on this scenario here. And then you just record a 5-minute phone call. It will say, should be approximately 5 minutes long. So every audio recording will give you a time frame, so you can just aim to stay with that. Once again, once that's finished, upload your audio, upload your change order form, submit. You are finished with module 1 and ready to move on to the next one. So as you can see, there's not a lot involved once you understand the concepts and where you're in the project. And the more you can see the project and feel it and understand these concepts, doing the actual assessments at the end should become quite straightforward. So hopefully that has helped with how to go about answering those questions. I'll just go back to here. I'll just open it up now. Are there any other questions that you particularly have about those assessments or anything else at all? As I said, those slides are available for you to download. I'm available anytime in messages if you've got questions or anything about future modules. So feel free to message me anytime if you've got any questions. But it looks like we are good for tonight. So on that note, I will say good night to you. Thank you for taking time out on your Monday night to join, and I really hope that this has given you a little bit more guidance on how to go about your studies, how to go about your assessments, and then particularly how to complete this first assessment. As I said, any feedback you have or any questions, more than welcome to hear it. And yeah, I'll be running some more different modules as we go on. So I'll be emailing out the students who are involved in those modules at the time. So yeah, as you see them come up, you're more than welcome to join me again. Otherwise, I look forward to talking with you through Message Centre. And yeah, I wish you all the very best with your studies. Thank you again, and have a wonderful rest of your night. Good night.